Hi, I'm Rob Price, and I'm talking to CEOs about AI. Welcome to Futurize.
Hi, I'm Karen Silverman, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group. We are a small boutique advisory firm working globally at this point, um, really on the hardest parts of technology governance for organizations that are taking it seriously and really trying to adopt and um, integrate these very advanced technologies into their business and operations.
Karen, it's fantastic to welcome you to the podcast and especially dialed in from West Coast US because you're at the heart of a lot of that manic ecosystem of stuff going on at the moment around the world of AI. So it must be fascinating to be at the heart of that, but equally interesting that you've got this strong voice around responsible use as opposed to just playing with everything that emerges.
Yeah, and so there's this whole eye of the storm phenomenon, but it's not calmer, weirdly, at the eye of this storm. So it's an interesting space to be in because there's so much happening every day that and the thinking that precedes the doing, sort of that the time gap between the thoughts and the outputs is really shortened. So it's an exciting time and a place. And we're very focused, as you know, on sort of the responsible use of these technologies as defined in the traditional way, but also just in the how do we make these things effective for use in business or in life or in school and understand where innovation plays its part, but also where we got to get stuff done, right? And how do we use these tools and technologies to get stuff done um, successfully, right? So it's that whole basket of stuff that we work on.
And I think, I mean, you raised an interesting point because we first met because I heard you talking about how you would advise boards around the adoption of agentic or generative AI, and of course, I imagine that a lot of boards they're full of curious people who will kind of naturally just want to utilize some of these technologies themselves anyway in their life, no matter what they do. So they will naturally be thinking, I assume, how do I make this relevant for my business? What do I do differently? But is that fair as an assumption, or is it more nuanced than that?
Yeah, well, I think that's very fair. And one of the reasons I love this space, and we work primarily with boards and leadership in organizations, right? So we start at the top because we think that that's at least a necessary but not sufficient ingredient to getting this stuff right. Is leadership needs to be bought in and realistic about what they want to accomplish with these technologies. And I think that one of the things that makes it so interesting is that these technologies touch everybody sort of in all the places, right? So they have great and direct relevance to your work life and also to your home life and also to your intellectual sort of curiosities and to your anxieties, right? And so board directors are people too, and they have the full range of emotion around all of this. And so the curiosity about these tools, we always say there's a lot of shifts in altitude and it bounces around between where are we going with the business, what should my grandkids major in university, you know, should I be playing with this kind of a technology? When is the right time to turn it on? I mean, it's all these questions come up because they're the questions that everybody's asking, and they're asking them in the boardroom too, right? And that's really interesting work because they are, as you say, a really experienced, curious, capable group of people who are going through all of this at the same time.
And they're also being bombarded by information all the time and views and perspectives. I mean, you go on LinkedIn and there is nothing else over the past 2 years other than debate and who knows what's right. So are you finding that people are curious and informed or fearful? And does it change every month? I mean, how are they feeling today?
So it's funny. I think these are just, I think. I think geometrically, and so I've come up with loops. It seems to be the sort of the best geometry here to describe it because people, for instance, are much more comfortable with LLMs than they were 2 years ago, but they're much less comfortable with some of the agentic technologies, right? So they're while at the same time they're developing mastery or capability and confidence in some areas, they're being tossed off balance, by the incoming newest next best thing. And your point about information flows is really critical because there's so much information, but such little confidence in how to curate it, right? And particularly when you're talking about leadership, whether that's senior executive leadership or board leadership, where they get their information is so motivated that it's really hard for them very often to figure out to just get a clean read on something, right? If it's a vendor trying to sell something, they're getting one sort of set of enthusiasms. If it's somebody within the organization who's trying to get more budget or less sort of complication in their life, whatever it is, they're getting a different set of enthusiasms. And so finding those resources where they can just get a clean read and then go from there has proven to be a real pain point for for that cohort. But they're super curious. They read everything. They listen to everything, including their brother-in-law at a cocktail party who has a great idea. And I mean, it can be chaos out there if they don't have a real firm grasp on what they're trying to learn and why. That makes
In a sense, there is no definitive right answer for a lot of this, is there? I mean, it's not like we've got this kind of book that sets out these are the things indeed, what's the concept of a book in these days, uh,
right.
as I think I've touched on before in the podcast. So how do you go about being in a position to advise boards? And I guess part of it is method and process and engagement, but I'm really interested in that currency of what's out there and one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is this: how much do you need hands-on experience of what's out there versus you've read about it so can make a recommendation?
You need a lot of experience. I think one of the um, one of the things that particularly senior people have been overlooking is, and I mean senior in role, right? What they overlook is how much experience they have, because the challenges in a lot of these technologies, particularly at the adoption, go, no go, left, right kind of decisions, it's as much about their organizations and the people in the organizations and their markets, and they've got tons of experience in that. It's the technology piece that is new and disrupting some of the well, a lot of the expectations, but some of the sort of physics of their environment are changing because of these technologies. But in fact, they know a lot about these environments, and so what we encourage people to do is to start thinking about what are they trying to get done with technology? What are the business problems that are um, most suitable or most at risk, because of these technologies? How do you start to develop the core capabilities and instincts really about and sort of understandings that are going to help you make the right decisions at the right time? And so I think experience is really critical, but it's almost experiencing it's we do a lot of work on like tabletop and scenario planning and pressure testing, so that leaders can get a feel for how these issues come up and how the technologies work so they can start to anticipate the kinds of problems that might arise. So it's not even so much about picking the right tool. That's not really their job. Their job is to understand the recommendation or fund it and then oversee its, deployment in some more stratospheric level. But to develop an instinct for the kinds of things you'd want to know and look for. And that is experiential, but that's kind of within the organization and they know the organization. So we build on that base of knowledge and then start to add these complications that are technology driven. And we try to do enough education so people, like you said, can sort of develop these instincts, but also so that they can start to scratch all the issues we were just talking about, right? So that they know enough about the technology so that they can also have a conversation with their family members who might be making different kinds of decisions. So we're trying to hit it at all those notes.
You touch on something that I'm passionate about actually, which is that shift from intent to execution. So, so many times I've heard and seen de desire to transform and change, specifically around AI, but actually more generally in terms of emerging technologies in the past, that then kind of gets slightly lost, kind of might not be the right word, but we'll say lost as it shifts into the organizational structure that then has to execute. And of course, the complication here is what we're seeing in the market is it's quite difficult to execute transformational change at scale in big organizations with brand new emerging technologies that you've then got to learn, understand how they operate, understand how they fit in your operating model, etc. How have you seen boards think about that shift into execution and how they might enable that?
Um, I think it is dawning on organizations in general and the boards that lead them that this is a bigger project than a smaller one. Right. I think where they go wrong and where we've gone wrong in the past, particularly with digital transformation, which, as you point out, we've been talking about now for the whole of our careers, probably, um, is that they're 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 conceived and funded and supported like projects, right? That they've got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we can tell at the end whether we did the right thing, or whether we overspent or underspent or whatever. I think this transformation is much more a process than it is a project. It's the mindset has to be that this is perpetual learning, agile governance. Um, there will be mistakes, there will be inefficiencies. Some of the things that look like inefficiencies are actually going to be incredibly valuable for reasons we haven't yet figured out, right? So the accounting around all of this is very different. And I think the level of commitment that we need is very different. What's interesting here is that not so you might ask, why would any board even take this on yet? Because it's changing so fast and it's going to be a massive undertaking, the details of which we can't at the beginning appreciate. And the reason is because there's also urgency and kind of imperative coming from the technology and from the markets and from the vendors and from global competition. And so that you've got all these sort of exigencies that are forcing organizations to contend with this murky, uncertain problem set. And so I think the first thing we need to do better at this than we've done at prior chapters is to commit to understanding that's the challenge we have, right? That this is not, some of this will go swimmingly and is going to be like turning on Copilot in the organization and let's see what happens, right? With some loose governance around what we'd expect. But you're not going to get your biggest uplift from those kinds of deployments. They're important and they've got value that exceeds probably the the revenue uplift that you would get from them. But and so you've got to find ways to kind of understand that value and invest in it. The real value is going to come from changing workflows and reconceiving of the way you build a product, deal with customers, manage employees, open markets, right? And so it's that, particularly from a board's perspective, it's that kind of project. And so for the rest of their natural lives as directors and otherwise, they will be looking at the hardest kinds of questions. And I actually think that's exciting. I mean, once you understand that that's now the job, that's exciting.
But it's different, isn't it? And I think you're spot
Very.
on in terms of we're used to buying systems that work or don't work. And I mean I did a piece of work with a very large organization in the US a year or so ago, and they said just make sure it's right half the time and demonstrate that it learns and improves all the time. And that's apps in my mind, that's absolutely spot on because if you've got this ability to continuously improve, continually learn, you are going to optimize towards the best answer, the right answer. It's different from buying a system that works.
Absolutely. Well, and you think about it, the conditions. that you need to solve for are emerging also. So to expect the thing to work on Monday is sort of fine, but by Wednesday, you know, you're already needing to adapt, right? So the system, I think one of the definitions of working is that it is continuously learning and adapting. And that's true of the organization, not just the technology that we would plug into it, right? But the organization itself. That's a different kind of leadership. It's exciting, right?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I'm fascinated by is what you see and how that's different around the world. Because I think you said right at the start, you're working in a number of different countries, a number of different continents. Do boards kind of react the same? Are you seeing the same risk appetite, the same ambition, the same concerns, or what do you see different?
Yeah, so I think this is a three-sided beast, right, or object. So definitely differences globally, right? There is in general, if you want us to overgeneralize for sure, risk appetites tend to be much greater in the US and other a little bit Asia, a little bit Middle East, much more caution as a starting point in Europe and and the UK. On the flip side, I think what I also see I see boards in Europe and the UK asking much more systems-based questions that are actually really the right questions to be asking, right? So that because they think a little bit more cautiously or laterally sometimes, and again, grossly overgeneralizing, um, they immediately look at the interdependencies between and interrelationships between technology and geopolitics and climate and the effect on supply chain. So they're thinking in terms of systems, which is really helpful when you get right down to the work. I think one of our challenges in the US sometimes is that the thinking tends to be a little more siloed. So we're solving a cybersecurity problem now, you know, and we're not really looking at the system in which that cybersecurity risk has emerged, and we have to do a little bit more sense making, right? So where we start the movie might be different. I think they kind of everybody gets to the same place ultimately. Um, there's also a vast difference between regulated and unregulated industries wherever in the world you happen to be, size of business and you know, is this a startup or is this a mature legacy you know, organization with huge operational obligations? You know, so those differences also matter. So it's hard. So I don't want to over rotate on the geographic differences, but there is they might start the movie in a different place.
What it's going to be an impossible question, but of all the organizations that you're working with in those different markets, in those different geographies, what does great look like? I mean, is there without you don't need to name an organization, but is there a board that you look at and think they're just going at it the right way? That's going to make a difference, and the fact that they're moving in the direction that they're moving is showing something that's relevant for others to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think every board we're dealing with, every C-suite we're dealing with is trying to figure out its own sort of posture and approach to this. And that's an evolving thing. But the ones that are doing great work, I think that will pay off in the long term, right? That are really doing the sorts of things that you could imagine they'll look back and say, well, that was a good use of our time and energy and funds. Um, show a great deal of curiosity and sort of lack of defensiveness on the one hand, but also a willingness to make decisions and then be prepared to adapt those decisions, right? And to support management in that work. So there's an openness to conversation and a willingness to acknowledge what they don't know and what they need to know, want to know, will never know, you know, are scanning the horizon about, and they're focused as much on the information flows so that they can make decisions as they are, you know, was that the right tool? Did we go fast enough? Like those are all, and those are sort of byproducts of this, what I would say, this curiosity that comes from a place of confidence that as a cohort they can deal with it, right? And so they have confidence in their collective judgment and the organization to kind of deal with it. And so they ask the questions that surface the really productive conversations. I think the boards that are overly cautious, less secure in their ability to process things, tend to ask only the questions they think they're prepared to deal with, right? And so that tends to be a much thinner or more brittle exercise, if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess maybe it's stating the obvious, but those that experiment, those that dive in, recognizing that not everything will be successful, are going to learn massively from the experience, not only the board themselves, but their people across the organization that, frankly, I would imagine no matter where they are in terms of the function of the operating model, everyone needs to be more aware than they are today about the new art of the possible, whatever that might look like.
And more innovative. I mean, we've been talking about innovation in the tech sort of STEM space for however long. We haven't innovated board governance in roughly 250 years. Like, so this idea that we now get to bring all the innovative thinking and juices to board governance, to business modeling, to market analysis, to frankly the economics as we understand them, that's the work, right? That this technology is asking us to do. And can you do that overnight? Not, no one can do it overnight. But the idea that you are excited and about to be engaged in that exercise as opposed to just, you know, modifying your board process on the margins to make sure that you understand sort of what the new tech department is doing. Like that's just never going to get you where you want to go. And boards are on their all they're all on their own journey for how quickly they can get to that mindset. Like that's not an overnight thing. And it's a real leadership challenge, quite honestly, because it's a very every organization we deal with is sort of will in some way reflect the full distribution of personalities, right? You've got your early adopters, you've got your middle adopters and your late adopters, you've got your risk-based folks, you've got your revenue, or innovate or die folks, and you've got to manage as leadership, you got to manage all of that, right?
I'm kind of now intrigued as to know whether any of the boards that you've talked to have explored things like implementing an open clause solution for the board governance. So in a sense, rather than a shadow board of, I don't know, maybe kind of more junior people across the organization, it's a shadow board of agents that helps guide them. Or is that too kind of Rob talking ridiculous things at the moment?
No, because in a year and a half, that might be normal. I don't know, but no, not yet. We're not seeing that. And I think that's a function of an appropriate level of caution around um, the nature and capability of these tools. And that's where it gets into understanding so the tools right now are still very language based. Even when we're talking about images, they tend to be, we tend to we're labeling images, right. We're still using words to describe most things, and there are profound limitations on that as and so the tools they're not really they're getting much better. And I think it's going to be interest the better they get, the harder these questions become, right? And but the plain fact right now is that they suffer from a lot of context collapse as
Yeah.
soon as circumstances get unusual, and they're still very they're based on the past, right? They're artifactual. So if you're a board looking at and trying to interpret the future, it's informational, but it's information based on historical realities. And so the job of leadership is to understand that and then go forward, which is a different exercise than the tools really are built to do, if that makes sense.
So in the conversations with those boards, I mean, a lot of people in the market talk about things like repeatable processes, which for me seems a bit kind of RPA world rather than AI world, for example.
Same
Um,
conversation.
but whether it's productivity or whether it's growth or efficiency or reduction of time or what are the key reasons that boards want to do something?
It usually starts with efficiencies. Like they want to, and the thing that's the moment that I, no, there are many moments that I enjoy, but one of the moments, just point of personal privilege, the one of the moments that I really enjoy is that once you start looking at efficiency really closely, you realize that it's critical in some ways and it's completely counterproductive in other ways, right? And that once you start looking for how to tweak a process in your organization, you very quickly realize you have to tweak all the processes in your organization, right? That very few of these they emerge to solve prior problems, and so they are larded up with layers and layers. And so getting back to core purposes and core bargains is really important. I think what boards, what the ambition should be is to do more things a new way, right? That's not been possible before, and to do what we do maybe better than we've ever been able to do it before, ideally to delight customers or whatever your actual organizational mission is. I think tying it back to your core values and purpose is a really important first step. And then use the tools to help you do that, as opposed to just cut headcount. That the cutting headcount is, I think, overblown as a raison d'etre, right? It just doesn't get you very far, and the math probably isn't right. Um, I think the opportunity. So one of the exercises we sometimes go through is a windfall exercise, right? So if all of a sudden you got 250 more skilled people and 250 more million more dollars to go do a thing that you've always wanted to go do, or try a thing that you've always wanted to go try, what would that look like? What does the uplift look like? What is the and that's also not a complete answer, but it kind of gets people thinking more in terms of the sort of the abundance and bonus thinking, as opposed to the dollars. How do I strip cost out of this, right? And they may end up in the same place, but we try to come at the conversation another way to unlock this why question.
And I guess the key part of that is because if they're not doing that, somebody else will be. Uh, and therefore, in a sense, that those big organizations that have got a spaghetti of systems developed over decades, existing processes in their thousands, limited and constrained by that spaghetti, that's tough to defend against an organization that's just going, right, we're going to create something born in agentic, born in AI, and we'll just wipe you out the market because
It
they're
just gets it
more
done.
agile.
Yeah, right, right. And we're not here protecting people's historical, you know, domains, because right, right, which and again, this is definitely a moment that it's either going there's going to be a combination of you're doing it and it's being done to you, right? This is just the way it is. But so what are the crown jewels? Like this really gets back to core corporate purpose, right? And in the context of a corporation. What are we here to do? How are we doing it? Are we doing it, if we were to earn efficiencies or savings, how could we deploy them um, to improve product or the experience or whatever it is? And so it needs to tie back to these core values. And I think a lot of organizations, like I said, they're still treating it like a tech project.
Yeah.
Like like an RPA. It's not RPA. It's a really a rethink, um, including of the business models. And that's the part that is hair-raising for lots of folks. Is that you really gotta, the economics of a lot of this are going to change. Their supply chains are going to change.
So if we bring that to a conclusion, then I've heard curiosity being key because it's important to explore. It's important to explore in the context of what your future business is about. Um, it's important to think about the broader workforce of the organization, the people across the organization and how they evolve. But if you were to bring it down to a couple of things that you would say to any board, look, kind of if you're listening to this podcast, just go into it tomorrow and do these two things differently. What would your advice be?
Um, Curiosity and courage, both. Um, and appreciate, I would encourage the systems thinking, and I would encourage an appreciation for the challenge in a good way that this transformation is going to be. That to sort of kick yourself free of the it's a project, it's a line item, it's a headcount reduction kind of thinking. It might be all of those things, but those are byproducts of what this exercise should be. So it's a mindset shift. And so you're going to be taking budget from one. So the other really big challenge that boards are going to have, and this is, I didn't want to sort of finish the thought before, is that once you realize that like kind of everything is broken, you have to get really good at figuring out what's a priority and what to fix, kind of in what, or what to address in what order. And so I think developing the skills for it's almost like air traffic control, right? Like so the ability to prioritize well and to target investments productively is going to be a skill set that boards are going to have to oversee. Like management has to do that, but boards are going to have to enable that. And so get smart enough to keep up with your management, as they are going through what you now need to understand is a pretty profound set of exercises. And like I say, yeah, it's a mindset shift would be my first. So I didn't even give you a short answer for that one, did I?
But I think what it all brings it back to is, look, be brave. This is big, bigger than anything that we've seen
Yeah.
before, and it's their job to drive through that uncertainty of the future of however many years it turns out to be, to ensure that there's something at the end of it, and that isn't going to happen by sitting there and waiting, because you still need your people to kind of know more than they know today.
Right. And abdicating to the technology that looks really smart is not the right answer to this complicated question either, right? It's like how do you sort of insist on this collective intelligence of the board to really inform and lead, and as you say, be brave.
Karen, it's
So
been a
curious.
pleasure. We could probably talk for another day, I would imagine. In fact, actually, maybe we should do it again in kind of 6 to 12 months to see how the market kind of continues to evolve. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I always love talking to you.